Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. The BBC says the 9 o'clock news will move to 10 o'clock in 2 weeks' time. That's far earlier than many people thought and comes despite pressure from some politicians for the corporation not to make the change. The BBC says it's a response to what audiences want. Critics will say it means a fall in the number of viewers. Our media correspondent David Sillito has the details.
After 30 years of the 9 o'clock news, it's moving to 10 and at speed. Plans to shift the schedule next October have been brought forward by a year. At a hastily rearranged press conference, the BBC said the news will switch to its new slot in a week on Monday. It'll go out 6 nights a week, the serious news agenda will stay the same, and the regional news will be doubled in length.
It's a 6-day-a-week, fixed time, 10 p.m. proposal. The regular 15-minute bulletin on Sunday evening will be introduced, and there's considerable evidence to suggest that audience want the news at fixed and predictable times.
Fans shocked but calm as England crash.
Behind this uncharacteristic haste is ITN's decision to go back to 10 o'clock 3 nights a week. They were forced to abandon their schedule because of a decline in audience numbers. The BBC says that in the long term, 10 is a better slot than 9, and they've decided to move as quickly to grab that audience. And they also say it'll help slow down the decline in the audience for the news in the long term. But the politicians are deeply unhappy.
I'm a little bit surprised that they came out so quickly with the decision that they have. I'm not, I have to say, overall surprised at the nature of the decision they've taken. But as I say, I think they need to be very careful and to look very closely at the audience figures and at the level of quality.
In the end, it's what the public thinks and what the public watches that'll be the key test. How many of them will tune in to the BBC at 10 o'clock rather than ITN? David Sillito, BBC News.
And Sir Christopher Bland is the BBC's chairman and he joins us now. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
The BBC is moving its 9 o'clock news to 10 o'clock. ITN is going to do the same thing. This leaves the viewers with no choice. All the evidence in America is that where newses go head-to-head, their news audiences decline. Won't that happen here?
Well, the news audience is declining at the moment on both channels. And of course our proposals are for news at 10 o'clock, 6 nights a week. ITV's proposals are to have the news 3 nights a week at 10 o'clock, so the degree of overlap will be relatively small. But the reason we've chosen to go at 10 is that we believe this is in the interests of viewers. This is the best time for the BBC, the world's greatest news-gathering organisation, to show its news. That's why we've done it.
Doesn't it have more to do with a ratings battle than loyalty to news values? A number of critics have been worried about the BBC dumbing down. The Culture Secretary, Chris Smith, has said only a week ago that he thought the BBC would be more likely to publish Big Brother on the news than Kosovo. Don't you feel that it leaves the viewers with a dumbed-down service?
No. And the proof of that pudding will be in the eating. But the idea that the BBC is more likely to desert an international story is plainly not suggested by what we show at 9 o'clock and what we'll show at 10. Our commitment to international and national news remains unrivaled. And it's worth pointing out that our proposals also include, for the first time, a fixed time for the news on BBC One on Sunday night and a doubling of our news from the nations and region, something that we've been pressed to do for a long time and we're doing now. So our commitment to the BBC's core news values remains as it always has been.
Sir Christopher Bland, thank you for joining us. Consumer groups have reacted angrily to the announcement that there's to be no investigation into the mis-selling of endowment mortgages. The Financial Services Association said today it believed many homeowners had benefited from endowment policies. But the Consumers Association says the decision will disappoint up to 4 million endowment policy holders who won't get any help in paying off the shortfall on their mortgage.
When Norman Raworth bought his house in the late 80s, he was recommended an endowment, even though it would cost more than a repayment, on the basis that he'd get an extra lump sum to retire on. He was never warned about the risks of a shortfall, a strong sign that it was missold.
We suddenly started getting phone calls saying that the mortgage, we weren't going to hit the target. So that really begins to worry you. because two things really: are we going to be able to pay the mortgage? And the third was, we're hoping to retire and then use the extra money for our future.
With endowments, unlike repayment mortgages, the homeowner saves into a policy which should grow quickly enough to pay off the loan and leave a large lump sum. But if the policy grows too slowly, there won't be enough to repay the original debt, leaving the borrower with a shortfall that may run into thousands. But today, the Financial Services Authority said it had calculated that up to the present, the average homeowner was better off with an endowment than they would have been with a repayment mortgage, meaning there was no need for systematic compensation. Critics say the FSA is letting homeowners down.
There's no question in our mind that the vast amount of endowments were missold. And the issue now is this computation for compensation. What matters to the individual consumer is that their mortgage isn't going to be paid off, and that was their understanding. And I'm not sure this very industry-friendly calculation is the right one.
Independent experts say homeowners shouldn't cash in their endowments.
They can either increase payments into their current endowments, they can go for a repayment option which ensures that their payment is guaranteed when the mortgage finally matures, or they can go for an individual savings account which is tax-free.
The message from the Financial Services Authority is that most endowment holders have done well up to the present. The question is whether that will be enough to satisfy nearly 4 million people who face financial shortfalls in the future. Andrew Verity, BBC News at the FSA in East London.
Christine Farnish is from the Financial Services Authority and she's in East London where the FSA has been holding a press conference. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Now, millions of people are going to be out of pocket. Not only that, they're going to be frightened that they can't meet this shortfall. Why shouldn't the fraudulent mortgage sellers have to meet this shortfall?
Where endowment policies have been missold and where consumers have lost out as a result, then firms will certainly have to meet the shortfall and have to pay compensation to rules that we are going to set out. But the truth remains that most people with endowment mortgages have actually done pretty well compared with a repayment mortgage. And so where that is the case, it's not right that they should also expect some compensation.
But what have you done so far, apart from arranging a fact sheet to be sent round?
We've done a lot more than arrange a fact sheet to be sent round. We've been investigating in great depth the scale of past mis-selling in the industry and also checking the extent to which consumers have or have not lost out. That's the basis for our conclusion that actually most people are still better off, despite the fact that they may not have been properly advised in the first place. They're actually in pocket.
But why are you not going to take any action against those people who fraudulently missold these mortgage policies?
We are taking action. There are a number of investigations in hand, as we explained at our press briefing this morning. That work will be concluding soon, and if it shows that fraudulent activity and breaking of the rules has gone on and people have been missold, then we will discipline those firms.
Christine Farnish, thank you very much for talking to us. There are hopes this lunchtime of an end to the current bloodshed in the Middle East. Both sides are reported to have agreed a ceasefire, though it hasn't stopped minor clashes between the two sides. One Palestinian is reported to have been shot dead by Israeli forces. Elsewhere, the ceasefire seems to be holding. And this morning, Israel began withdrawing troops from some of the most sensitive areas. Tomorrow, Israel's Prime Minister Ehud Barak and the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat are due to hold peace talks with the American Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. More than 50 people have died in 6 days of violence in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and Arab villages inside Israel. Our Middle East correspondent Paul Adams reports from Jerusalem.
After 6 days, the first tentative signs of a way out of this crisis. Israel is moving some of its troops away from trouble spots. It comes as a relief to the owner of this Ramallah hotel. Israel says it's time to talk.
A meeting in Paris between these two leaders may be conducive not only to the end of fire, but also to the permanent agreement on peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians.
But it's not over yet. On the edge of Jericho, Israeli tanks stand guard at the scene of one of yesterday's clashes. At a nearby refugee camp, Amin Sijdi is mourning the death of his son Mohammed. His uncle told me the family had lost its main breadwinner.
What can I say? He's a young boy, full of energy, you know, looking forward for his life, for his family, to help his father.
There have been many funerals like this in recent days. At each one, the well of Palestinian anger gets a little deeper. This normally quiet area is not used to scenes of violence. The fact that 3 people were killed here yesterday is a sign that the conflict is spreading throughout the land, touching the lives of everyone living in it. And the day's first clashes have already taken place. Despite talk of a ceasefire, there are reports of gun battles in Nablus and Gaza. While the two sides get ready to talk, the bloodshed goes on. Paul Adams, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Lord Archer made his first court appearance today on charges of perverting the course of justice and perjury. The former Deputy Conservative Party chairman appeared at Bow Street Magistrates' Court to face allegations that he asked a former friend to provide a false alibi before a libel trial 13 years ago. Lord Archer was remanded on bail until the 14th of November. An inquest into the Omagh bombing has ended. In his closing statement, the coroner, John Leckie, severely criticised Real IRA, who carried out the attack, describing the warnings that they gave as inaccurate and misleading. 29 people died when a car bomb exploded in the middle of a busy shopping street 2 years ago. On day 2 of the Conservative Party conference, the debate has moved on to health. The party says it wants to see a big expansion in private health care to ease the pressure on the NHS. William Hague told the conference it was the best way to help cut waiting lists. Our political correspondent John Pienaar is in Bournemouth. John.
Anna, the electioneering's in full flow. Lots of new policy, lots of stunts to get the public's attention. This meeting here in the open air has been about saving the pound. But now the Tories are starting to answer key questions about how they'd spend it. In particular, how they'd square their promise to cut taxes with their promise to spend more on key services, like the NHS.
The health service is under pressure, and there's a lot to be gained by any party that's trusted to bring down the queues for treatment. But the Tories are taking a risk. They're promising to expand private healthcare to ease the pressure. William Hague will be accused of privatising the NHS, of setting up a two-tier system. Today in the hall, he said it was about helping the NHS deliver.
I believe in a strong national health service in this country, and we are going to make sure that we've got it. But we also have to make sure that the money is well spent, because at the moment it's not well spent. And we can do so much better for this country if we not only continue to build up the funding of the National Health Service, but also enlarge the private sector so that the total of healthcare available in this country is enlarged.
She's here. It wouldn't be a Tory conference without her. And Lady Thatcher didn't waste any time joining in the argument about spending. Her target was Labour, of course. Her point, her fellow pensioners were being shortchanged.
But that which you have contributed for, you should get when you retire and not have it taken away. But that's what Labour's like.
The party faithful still love Lady Thatcher, that's obvious. What's less obvious in the euphoric atmosphere at this conference is exactly how the Conservatives' plans will add up. The leadership insists that there's room for spending cuts across government.
I don't feel embarrassed in saying as we go into this election, I'm not prepared to promise as much as Labour. I'm not prepared to put people through this whole business again of building up their expectations just to knock them down.
The Shadow Chancellor gets his chance to sell his low tax and better spending promise in his big speech later today.
So the big themes of the coming election are in place. The argument about Europe's well underway, and now the argument about spending is gathering pace. Anna?
Thank you, John. In Yugoslavia, there's been a second day of protests by opponents of President Slobodan Milosevic. Electricity supplies are being disrupted by striking miners, and opposition supporters are being called in to demonstrate in the capital, Belgrade. John Simpson has been watching the opposition campaign from neighbouring Montenegro.
The opposition comes to town in style. For several years, Čačak, 80 miles from Belgrade, has been a centre of political resistance to President Milosevic. Now the opposition leader, Vojislav Koštunica, has come to address them. It's very simple, he says. Serbia needs change, but it won't happen as long as the man who disgraced this country is still in power. The crowd loves it. For a small place, the turnout is huge. Yet although quite large parts of the country are in open rebellion against President Milosevic, the only thing that'll force him out of office is a mass movement in Belgrade itself. Improvised roadblocks are still being set up on the main routes into and out of Belgrade. Opposition supporters are bringing the country to a halt for hours at a time, and the effects of that seem to be growing.
And the strikes are spreading. This morning, parts of Belgrade suffered their first electricity blackouts as supplies of coal failed to reach the power stations. And men from the hydroelectric plants near Belgrade have now also joined the miners on strike. Altogether, the pressure on President Milosevic is growing.
But we still don't know what he'll do in reply. Forces loyal to him are on call at many sensitive points. Mr. Milosevic hasn't yet made his move. John Simpson, BBC News, Montenegro.
And the time 17 minutes past 1, and later in the programme, a hero's welcome. Steve Redgrave brings home his 5th Olympic gold. And the man who killed John Lennon tries to win his release from jail. Well, one banner said it all. It read simply, "Welcome home, heroes, all of you." This morning, hundreds of people were at Heathrow Airport to greet Britain's triumphant Olympic team, its most successful since 1920. Our correspondent Daniela Ralph was there.
This was no normal arrival home. Some athletes seemed utterly bewildered by the reception they received at Heathrow, while others were keen to show off their contribution to Britain's biggest medal haul for 80 years. Even the most established members of the British team seemed taken aback by the level of support they've received.
Phenomenal, it's quite breathtaking.
What are you going to do today?
Sleep. Sleep, I'm so tired. It's been a long journey, but I'm glad I'm home. Really.
Athletes who left Britain as unknowns have returned as sporting heroes.
It's been a fabulous time, achieving my goal that I never could do, and just being part of something special. You know, Great Britain, we've done outstanding. It's a wonderful feeling.
But some are still getting used to the fame that comes with being Olympic champion.
It's pretty odd because I'm still Tim, really, and yeah, coming from the sport of rowing, it's sort of small sport that now we're looked at as Olympic champions and inspirations of others. It's great.
Can a chap with a medal please smile?
The group photo call for medal winners showed just how impressive the British performance had been. This level of success had not been predicted, and team managers now want to build on what's been achieved. For the vast majority of these athletes, the priority now is to take a holiday. But it won't be long before the training resumes, ready for the Commonwealth Games in 2 years' time, and then the next Olympics in Athens in 2004. Daniela Ralph, BBC News at Heathrow Airport.
Among the returning athletes was Britain's greatest Olympian, Steve Redgrave. He rode his way into the history books by winning his 5th gold medal in 5 consecutive games. His family were there to greet him, and our correspondent Robert Hall was with them. Robert.
Yes, indeed, and the car behind me is a sign that Steve Redgrave is back in town. More of that in a moment. You can see Steve himself has been down to meet some of the villagers. Not that he needs a posh car to be recognised here. Everyone's been following his progress. The signs along the road betray their belief in their hero, and indeed their celebrations and those of Steve Redgrave's family began some 9 hours ago.
Grandad made that last night.
Up long before the lark to ensure this homecoming was never forgotten. Steve Redgrave's parents leading this section of his family's welcome committee on their half-hour journey to Heathrow.
Really looking forward to seeing him, and I think he'll enjoy seeing the things that have been done for him when he gets home, you know, like the flags in Marlow Bottom and people's reception. I think that's really what will get to him.
The scale of that reception really became clear as Steve Redgrave stepped through the glass doors at arrivals. Family, friends, fellow travellers and journalists. A sea of faces and a flood of questions.
I loved every minute out in Australia. It was very special games. That's why I wanted to carry on, because I thought it was going to be. But it's always even extra special coming home, and a welcome like this is just fantastic.
Outside, another surprise. The waiting Jaguar was not a hired limo, but Anne Redgrave's welcome home present. Edging somewhat gingerly into the traffic, Steve couldn't quite believe he was at the wheel.
I had a car organised when I picked up my CBE for the Palace, and I thought it'd be something like that, or Lombard had organised a car for the day.
Oh my goodness.
Hi everybody.
Back home, another indication of what is to come. Villagers lining the final mile, their first opportunity to meet a neighbour who made sporting history. Well, this is the informal stuff. There'll be more formal celebrations with a civic reception and a reception by his rowing club a bit later in the month. For now, though, of course, the questions are all about retirement. Steve, as usual, being very coy about that. The priority for him and his family, I think, is probably to get a decent night's sleep. Anna.
Robert, thank you very much. They're neck and neck in the polls, and now they're about to go head-to-head. The two US presidential hopefuls, George W. Bush and Al Gore, face each other tonight for the first of 3 televised debates. Our Washington correspondent Philippa Thomas reports.
Setting up the stage for tonight's confrontation, when as many as 75 million Americans will be watching the two men perform. For Texas Governor George W. Bush, this will be the toughest test yet. Vice President Al Gore has debated in the past, but needs to present himself as a warmer human being. From the very first debate, pitching a relaxed John F. Kennedy against a visibly nervous Richard Nixon, image has spoken volumes. Of course, getting the facts wrong is the nightmare scenario.
There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe.
I'm sorry, could I just follow? Did I understand you to say, sir, that the Russians...
But just as often, a single line can really boost a candidate, like this from the Reagan-Carter debates.
There you go again.
For some, the pressure can be just too much.
Who am I? Why am I here?
Today's candidates know why they're here and how much this debate matters.
Gore has to avoid being perceived as too nasty, too critical, or too negative in his attacks. And Bush, on the other hand, has to show that he is, has the gravitas to do the job, that he is a big enough man, that he has the stature to be president.
After months of intensive campaigning, 90 minutes here could make all the difference. Tonight, the candidates will stand here, face to face for the first time, fighting it out for the loyalty of America's undecided voters. Philippa Thomas, BBC News, Boston.
And you can see that debate live on BBC One and BBC News 24 beginning at 2 o'clock tomorrow morning. Parts of Belize and Guatemala are still being pounded by Hurricane Keith, causing flash floods and mudslides. The hurricane has already killed 5 people in Nicaragua and forced thousands of people from their homes in Mexico and Central America. It's been described as the biggest change to the justice system in 800 years and one which will affect all of us. The Human Rights Act came into force yesterday, but what impact will it have on family life? In the first of 2 special reports for the News at 1, our correspondent Karen Allen has been looking at what the changes will mean to one family.
Bowling on a drizzly afternoon in Bedfordshire, a time for a 16-year-old couple and the rest of his family to forget the pressures of school and work. Simple though it may seem, this basic freedom to enjoy family life, which the Gulatis hold so dear, is a key part of the Human Rights Act, legislation which lawyers claim will change our lives. But Asha, couple's mother, can't see what all the fuss is about.
I don't think it's going to make any difference, because everybody's going to lead their life as normal.
But potentially it could make a difference because of the range of freedoms it protects. The increasing use of CCTV and other surveillance technology compromises privacy. And although it's tightly regulated, there could be cases in the future where it's felt the intrusion goes too far. Even out on the road, the Gulatis could exercise their human rights, for example, by challenging the way alleged motoring offences are investigated by the police. It's already happened in Scotland, where the law came into force last year. And waste dumps like the one where the Gulatis come each week could pose a threat to the enjoyment of family life if built in residential areas without proper consultation.
If it is in the residential area, definitely it breaches the human rights because there are a lot of pollutants from there.
At the Gulatis' home, Abhishek gives his teenage brother a hand with his homework. It's this generation which is increasingly expected to test their human rights in the courts, for example on issues like smoking, relationships and dress at school. But Abhishek worries it'll mean time and money is wasted.
Lawyers will see the opportunity. They'll be opportunists and they will see that this is bringing in new business for them.
Though the Gulatis may feel that their daily home life won't be touched by the new legislation, the organisations they all have dealings with, like schools, hospitals and councils, will. Karen Allen, BBC News.